Well, welcome to another feel-good conversation with me, Carl Munson, not Louisa Munson. We've hijacked her channel, and I'm here tonight with Bryan Hubbard, originator, creator of Time-Light Therapy. Bryan, it's so good to be with you and talk to you about this incredible subject phenomenon. Thank you for saying yes to coming along and talking about it this evening.
Delighted to be with you, Carl, again. We go back a long way, Carl and I, for some of you who don't know the history. And always delighted to be with Carl. And thank you for your interest, Carl. Carl's been a tremendous champion of Time-Light, and I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Oh, no, really. I am. I'm deeply impressed by what you've been talking about over the years. And of course, people may know you. Oh, is that Bryan Hubbard from What Doctors Don't Tell You? Because I think that's where our paths first crossed. What Doctors Don't Tell You, still going strong, right?
Yeah, well, it's going. And yeah, after, I think it's been going for about 32 years.
Has it really?
I started when I was a Boy Scout, and
as a
now
project.
it was a bobber job.
Your publishing badge.
It is a hard-fought one. And yeah, so we've been doing that since 1989, believe it or not. It's incredible. And, you know, we still haven't run out of stuff to say. Yeah, it's still really important because we know we've helped lots of people, and, you know, it's important work. Yes. But I think that what I'm doing now with Time-Light and what Lynn has been doing for some years with her intention work, and many of your viewers will know about her work, I'm sure, Power of Aid, intention and stuff. Yeah, these are close to our hearts now in the autumn of our years than What Doctors is. And I just feel like that now I've really, you know, with Time-Light, to me, it really is radical. It's a totally different way of looking at your problems, and it's having success. And I just feel, you know, I've got to get out there and do this more. So this is the great quest of the last years of our lives, you know, to do this stuff. Oh, well, hopefully lots more of those, but
yes, absolutely. Shall I get on with it?
Hurry up, mate. Yeah. I won't put an LP on, but okay. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Lynn there, Lynn McTaggart, of course, your wife and co-publisher of What Doctors Don't Tell You, and people will be familiar with Lynn's work. And it's time has come, hasn't it? And it's been amazing what's been going on with both What Doctors Don't Tell You, the intention work, what Lynn's doing, and what you're doing here. I think the time's absolutely right. Would you agree?
Yeah. You know, when you go around and meet people, you always feel the time is right because people are wonderful, and you wonder, how can there ever be problems in the world when there's so many wonderful people in it? Yes. But and that is true. But I think in terms of a big consciousness shift, I think it is changing, and I think really COVID was a very big watershed where the world started to divide. And whilst we never were part of the great pandemic theory with What Doctors, we did feel and do feel an awful lot has not been told to people. Yeah. And I think that's true across the board with many, many things. Okay. And I think there's been, I think amongst the thinking cognoscenti, shall we say, I think there's an increasing distrust on the orthodoxy and the scientists and what have you. And so I think that's part of the reboot, really. And I think we're in good position to help people with that. Certainly with What Doctors, researching 30 years of that. So we've got a lot there. With Lynn's work, it's very science-based as well, where she's done 40 double-blind studies now in intention, and plus the amazing work that she's doing, and the thousands of people who've been helped by that. We've got testaments to that. And it's just starting with Time-Light, and that's already helping people. We've got a German clinic has picked up on it and it wants to. Really? It is working with it as well. And they decided to try it on the most difficult patients. I thought, oh, great, thanks, mate. But
well, that's excellent. What a brilliant benchmark.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on. And it's just that I think we've reached a point, just speaking really just about Time-Light for a minute.
Sure.
That, I think that psychiatry has really hit a dead end, and that this has become more and more apparent in recent years. And I think it's really reached a point now where it really doesn't know what to do. The go-to therapy now in psychiatry is ECT, electroconvulsive therapy.
Is it really still?
They've gone back to that. And it's because the drugs just aren't working. Because, so, I don't know if you saw a recent study a couple of weeks ago now, they have finally admitted that serotonin imbalance has absolutely nothing at all to do with depression. Yep. So they're sort of back to page one, really, and they don't really know which way to turn. And I think, it's because they're not looking at the problem the right way around. And this is what Timelight tries to do, because what is a very interesting thing that has come out of this whole collapse of psychiatry is a new theory, which I think is really exciting, which is whether you have a mild mental disorder, and I don't like to use the phrase, but we'll stick with the standard definitions, of things like anxiety or whatever it might be, all the way across to bipolar, psychosis, schizophrenia. They're now saying actually this is all part of the same spectrum, and that it's only a matter of degree, not difference. And that is actually quite interesting, because then you can start saying, okay, so what is the common ground of anxiety and bipolar? And they don't actually know. And I can talk in a minute about the genesis of Timelight, how it came to me. But what has been interesting since I've developed the work, there's been so much coming through, which to me really endorses the work that I'm doing. Because, for example, they've discovered in trauma patients that the amygdala, it changes. The structures of the amygdala actually physically change. It's different for a traumatized person as it is to a healthy person, which I think is quite significant. Absolutely. And I think something even more significant, which really sort of drove the point home to me a while ago, was that they coined this expression adverse childhood events, which is a great expression. But what that means is anything that happens to you as a child, that anything from, again, it's a wide range of 17 different things. Anything from, your mum and dad shouted at you, your mum and dad weren't at home when you got home.
Check.
Well, yeah, I know. Exactly. If I go through it all, I mean, this is what is crazy when I do go through it in workshop. It is check. So many people had traumatized childhoods. Anyway, so this study's discovered that if you checked 4 or more of these adverse events, you are 4 times more likely to die prematurely, 3 times more likely to have chronic health problems, and so on. It's now been described as the 4th major cause of chronic disease, an adverse effect as a child. And you suddenly think, hold on a minute. So anyway, these things are going on. This extraordinary thing about adverse childhood events, this extraordinary thing that trauma itself changes the physical structure of the brain. And it endorsed what I've always been saying. Time is not a dimension. Time actually doesn't exist other than an energy. It's only time that exists is psychological time, and it is energetic. It must be energetic because you need energy to change a brain structure, right? You need energy. Something energetic must have happened to create this that goes through your life. So as an adult, you are 4 times more likely to die prematurely, 3 times more likely to have a chronic health problem. That has to be energetic, right? It's not dead and buried. It's a living thing in you. So one of the basic premises of Timelight therapy is that time itself is energy. It's not a dimension. And this, we all have to go through this, but psychological time is the only time, and it starts at the point of trauma, to use a psychiatric term. I don't use the term trauma because I think trauma makes you think, oh my God, I've never been in a war zone, and my dad wasn't shot in front of me. And I think people think of that as trauma.
Yes.
So I don't use the phrase. I use a term, it's called a time-heavy experience. So time begins really when anything happens to you where there is a separation. And inevitably, it must happen. We have to all go through this to then understand the process of time itself. And that is the key to the human condition, human suffering, and ultimately human salvation. Because once you understand the process of psychological time and see the relationship to your problems, that it is in fact time itself as an energy creating this, creating your world, creating the you that moves in that world. When you really see that, is transformative.
I got a great sense of that listening to a talk that you recorded. Was it the Esalen Institute?
Oh, yeah, the Esalen, yeah.
I listened to that, and I've been looking at your work over the last few years, and I almost want to have a moment to let that profundity sink in of what you've just said, because it is deeply profound what you've just articulated. Thank you for the context of where you've come from with What Doctors Don't Tell You, the work with Lynn, and we'll come back to how you're working together. And there's an event people can go to coming up. But I would love to go deeper into this, and I want to give people the space to go, whoa, because the time, you know, it's a cliche, isn't it? Time doesn't exist, man. It's kind of like a, you know, it's a bit trite, isn't it? But I think you've actually pointed the way to a new level and profundity of realization around this, Bryan.
Well, let's just deal with the triteness of it for a minute, because you're right. You know, this is hippie 1960. We're back there, guys. No, but it's but if you quantum physics, physicists, there is not an equation that determines time. They cannot find it. Time, Einstein tried. That was the great puzzle for Einstein, was to understand time, and he failed because it doesn't exist. Now, you see, time, you say, well, that's crazy because, you know, I look at the next day and it's morning, and before that it was dark. I've got more lines on my face. How can you say time doesn't exist, right? Well, time is a measure of change, is actually what it is. Yeah. If there was no change in the world, if I never aged, if it was permanent daylight, there wouldn't be time. Time is a measure of change or a process. If a process didn't exist, time would not exist. So therefore, it is dependent upon change in order to have existence. So it does not independently exist. Yeah. And so what actually is happening is not that if you like, this is a great one here, you know, you're not getting older, you're just changing. And that's true.
I think people will take great comfort in that.
Is that wonderful?
It is true, isn't it?
You're not getting older, you're just changing. And that's true.
And people change at different rates, don't they? So people's experience of time is therefore different. So it can't be an absolute, can it?
No, well, it isn't, and it is, and as I'm saying, if you look at physics, they can't find it. It doesn't exist. You know, all these great physicists say it just doesn't exist. It's not there.
Bryan, what do they do in those laboratories then? How are they going to break it to people? You know, is it the National Physical Laboratory not far from where you live in Teddington or somewhere like that, where aren't great minds trying to find this? And have they already discovered it? They daren't tell anybody.
Well, I don't know if they found it out for themselves because they'd lose the grants, but.
Ooh,
sorry, but but it's as I say, the time only exists as energy, and that's a really, I mean, if I may say so myself, it is quite an insight, and it really is quite a radical one.
Yes. Well, let's rewind, if we may, then, to see how you came about that insight. Before we do that, let's just see that the Mrs. M here, whose show we've hijacked temporarily, is saying bonne nuit. So no hard feelings so far from Louisa there. Catherine Connors tuned in. Good evening to you, Kate. Great to see you here. I thought you'd be able to relate to this, what we're talking about tonight. I've been seeing this expressed in clients for years. And these were I mean, what an unfortunate acronym, ACE, the Adverse Childhood Experience. Yeah. Thanks for being here, Kate. Stick around. Do me a favor, everybody who's tuned in at the moment, please tell other people. This is really important and profound, as I've said, the message that Bryan is sharing with us tonight. Milan is here as well. Power of intention awareness, new age problems and collapse of old world institutional systems and integrity create contrastive crisis at all levels. Personally, socially, politically, economically, etc. We are 100% energy, and so are realities. Cheers with a couple of pints there for us, Bryan. Milan, bless his, if only, right? Louisa saying, I am enjoying changing at this stage of my life. There you go. I think you've helped with Mrs. M downstairs there with that reframe. Yes. And a round of applause from Nubia Net, who's joining us tonight. So please share this. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, please let others know. We have Bryan here live with us this evening. And if you've got questions for Bryan, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. But let's get into it then, Bryan. How did this this quest, I suppose, is how it might have started. You wanted to know why am I unhappy, or why aren't people happy, or those sorts of
questions. A bit sharper than that for me, because I had sort of chronic depression for about 10 years, and none of it made sense to me. And it's quite weird. Well, I know now why I was depressed, but it sort of didn't make sense at the time. But the reason why I was depressed was because I was abused as a child. it wasn't physical abuse, but it was emotional abuse. And my father, clearly didn't want to have a child, so probably especially not me. And I did something, and he just really screamed at me. I think I was about 3. That was the last communication I had with him till I was about 7 or 8. And his only means of communication was whistling at me.
Good heaven.
And my joke is that even when people whistle today, I salivate and ask for a biscuit. But no, that's not true. But that was...
I've heard of that experiment.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen that somewhere. No, anyway, so that was his means of communication. But the funny thing is, and I know it's true for your other viewers, but when you are abused as a kid, you don't see it as abuse.
No.
And for the longest time, I didn't make the connection between that abuse and my depression many, many years later. It never occurred to me what that problem was. But one thing I did know, well, there were several wake-up things. Well, I got married to Lynn, and that was an amazing wake-up because, it's a very, very, we grow together. And that really is the signal of a really great relationship. You grow together. And that was very important. Another big wake-up was when I had our first daughter. And I knew enough that there was no way was I going to bring up my daughter in the way that I'd been brought up by my father. I knew that. But despite that, I still was very depressed. But I just obviously didn't know what to do about it. I did a few therapies. The sort of chemical imbalance thing just never rang true for me, thank goodness, because, it has now been utterly disproven. But I didn't really know what to do. And I'd had sort of spiritual, if you like, experiences as a kid. And throughout my years, I always had a keen interest in spirituality. And I collected the gurus. So I used to go and see people like Krishnamurti. Probably none of your viewers even know who that is, but he died a few years ago. You don't. No.
I do, definitely.
You do.
Love Krishnamurti.
Krishnamurti, and sort of more recently Andrew Cohen and people. So anyway, I followed these guys as well. And so I've always had that sort of interest, if you will, but it didn't really help me particularly. So it came to a crisis point. And I suppose over the years, things accumulated where that crisis happened. And all the time, clues were dropping into my lap. And one of them was my own father, where we did reconcile towards the end of his life. But he really had reached a point where he just quite literally said he got tired of living. And he was 90, but in physically good shape. He'd had a checkup about 3 or 4 years prior, and they said he had the heart of someone who's about 60 or 70. So he was in good shape. But I went to see him one day, and he was in bed. And he said, really had said, I just don't want to live anymore, quite literally. So I've really had it. And my mum and I just thought, well, he's just in one of his many moods, and he'll pass, he'll be all right again, And that was a Sunday, and my mother phoned me the following Wednesday, and she said, Dad's dead, he's died. And I really thought, wow. And it really hit me hard, because I thought it really was a case of a guy who'd had enough, really had enough, and didn't want to live anymore. I thought, what on earth could that be? And of course, it suddenly hit me. There was this preponderance of the heaviness of time have finally weighed down on him to such an extent that he couldn't see life anymore, because life is the present, right? And he just couldn't see that anymore. And the heaviness of the past finally wore him down to the point where he said, I just got to die.
And the life went out of him.
And I think it happens to a lot of people. A lot of old people die of old age because he's just a real catch-all for actually, we don't know. He just died. And I do think that it can often be that it is just the preponderance of past just overbears people. And so that was quite an important thing. But it was one of the clues. I had a number of clues along the way. And it finally sort of hit me very hard. It was like this extraordinary thing jarred into my head, this extraordinary expression. To this day, I have absolutely no idea where it came from, but it seems almost biblical. It's almost like the 11th commandment, which was a bit too heavy for Moses to bring down from Mount Sinai, so he left it there. Bryan will pick it up a few years' time. And it was this, that to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. That to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? What is that? And it really took me a long time to work through that, to understand what that was saying to me.
Yeah.
And it was that if we don't attend to things in life, if we don't fully meet the moment, whatever it might be, whether we're being screamed at or whatever, if we don't meet it fully, it will become a residue of the past. It will stay alive in us. And as an energy, it will continue to express itself in the world. Because one thing you will notice when you do have a preponderance of time is you're going to repeat patterns. You start making the same mistake, making the same decisions, whatever it might be. But it's not you making them, it's the actual event making those patterns in your life now. And so those things go on in people, and it was just that understanding of that, fully meeting that moment. And if you don't, you will create past. And from that, I created a whole model of different time selves that we are. It wasn't past. Psychological past is the major one, which we've been talking about. But we have two other pasts too, which is one is narrative past, where you which is your story. Mm-hmm. And that, my name is this, I was born here, I was brought up a Christian, whatever it might be, all of which is untrue in the sense, because it's just relative stuff, right? It's just relative stuff. You're not really Carl.
Yes.
You're not Carl. You're something much more extraordinary than Carl. But we don't see that. We see Carl, right? So the shorthand, we need the shorthand, but when you use the shorthand, you miss the point.
I understand that. Yes.
You miss the mystery.
My magnificence, your magnificence would be too overwhelming.
So no, not mine. You're just yours, Carl.
We just shortened it then. Okay. So yes, but
so,
I mean,
anyway, so there's the narrative part, and then finally there's the knowledge part, right? These are all memory types, and everything we do is knowledge, because if we did remember how to tie our shoes, we wouldn't tie our shoes. It requires knowledge. Now, when you have two of those merging, which is the narrative past with the psychological past, you create conflict, because then you have narrative tied in with hurt. Yes. And that is the home of all conflict, all war, all anger. Yeah. And so, but it's all memory forms.
Yes.
All memory forms. Now, but we have present too. There is a simple memory which happens in the present moment, which is just almost animalistic, and we need that to survive. That's the stuff where you feel threatened. You've got to. That's what you need. That simple memory. This doesn't look good. I need to get out of here. Right. That's a simple memory form which you need to survive. And then the final thing, and this is what really this is all about, is the no time. What I call the potential, because you either are in time or you're in no time. And the extraordinary complexity of the human being is that he can be in all three at the same time. But the more there is the past, which is the energy which comes through us, the less of no time we can feel and experience in life. But that's really where we've got to get to. We have to pass through time to get to no time. A baby is in no time. But baby is in that sense does not recognize or understand time. As disappointments happen in life and so forth, what I call time-heavy experiences start, the sense of separation begins, space and time get created as energy, and then you're on your way.
You're on your way, absolutely,
and away from the time to stay. So ultimately, what we have to do is recognize it's not a relationship with the problem; it's a relationship with time. And when you understand that, then the problem can be resolved. Because a problem, as I say, if it's an energetic past, is creating a you that owns the problem, that has the problem. Yes. Now, it's not that we sort of have anger issues, say, well, go and see an anger consultant who'll teach you to speak, to count to 10 and all this sort of stuff, as if I am an independent agent who elects to be angry. And therefore I can do something about this. Wrong way around. That is not the case. The point is, anger itself is an expression of this energy of time, which creates a you that then owns the anger.
Yes.
So what you really have to understand is the process that's going on. There's no you electing to be angry. And this is the basic fundamental problem of standard therapy, is that it sees an independent agent determining things. And really, there isn't. There's no one there other than that which is created by this energetic past. And when you see that, you suddenly create space, and then in that space, true resolution and revolution can occur.
Clearly, I mean, I get it to a great extent. I really feel what you're saying. I've had experiences in my life which kind of concur and support it, and I think other people here will have that as well. And you said earlier on that this is being delivered or taught as a therapy. Is that right?
Well, it's a number of things are going on. One is that it's being practiced at a clinic in Hamburg by psychiatrists. They're trying this out.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I'm teaching it and be doing increasingly more of that. And I just felt, I've done a couple of books on this. The first one was called Timeline, and then Hay House got hold of it and we redid it, and it became The Untrue Story of You. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. And I've dabbled in doing something about it for the longest time and just sort of felt it didn't feel right. And only now do I feel I've really got to push this out into the world. Not because I particularly want to, not because I want to be a Joe Dispenza or have adulation, because I don't. I just feel that it's important. And I feel it's my duty, if you like, to do this. And so therefore I feel I should. What happens with it and how people respond to that is up to them.
Yes.
But if I've done my duty and got it out there as much as I can, then I feel, okay, well, I've done my part. If you like, I've honored this extraordinary 11th commandment, if you like,
Yes, I was just thinking that, because if it remains in you as undelivered and becomes a burden, then clearly you are a product of that 11th commandment that you articulated before.
But I also, but God will, when I die, I'll probably want the tablet back, and there's that too. But I don't know. It's I'll give it to somebody else. He says,
Well, I appreciate that you see it as your duty, and in many ways, I see it as my duty to ask you about it. There is that I feel called in much the same way.
Thank you.
And there are a few things. I mean, in your articulation of all of this, I'd like to unpack a few things, if I may.
Sure.
One, we invite questions as well. I'm not sure if this is a question from Shannon over there in the United States this evening here in Portugal, but your afternoon or lunchtime probably, Shannon. It took until my son was about 3 or 4 that I realized I was bullying him like my stepdad did to me. I was able to change that particular pattern, but took me a while to heal from the perfection pattern. Now, thank you, Shannon, for sharing that. Really appreciate it. And that is a realization of great good and merit, isn't it? To see oneself in that way and then release from it. And this is, I suppose, when you're talking about your duty and whether or not people get it or anything happens with it.
Yeah.
I suppose what we're pointing to here, or what you're creating a context for, is for realizations to take place.
Yeah.
And for the penny to drop or the light bulb to go on, and people achieving some level of freedom in the way that Shannon did there. Is that how it is? Is it an offering?
Ultimately, ultimately, it's a spiritual therapy.
Yes.
It's to, it's an old-fashioned phrase, but it's to get people to realization. And I think it really is a whole new look on this.
Yeah.
And I mean, I must say that if you go through, I mean, it is in lots of, I found it in Buddhist texts, I found it in Hindu texts, I found it in Islam, but mostly it's in Christianity. And I called Jesus the Time Lord because there are so many references he makes to time.
Expect a call from Andrew Davis. Is that the guy who writes the Doctor
Who? Yeah, well, absolutely.
Wow, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? Jesus is the next Time
Coming
Lord.
Out of the telephone box.
Yes.
Please. Hello.
Yes. No, but sorry, I was distracted by that reference. But say more, please, about that. Jesus, the Time Lord.
No. And so I mean, he's so understood the nature of time, and he didn't say that much, and I'm sure only some of that got written down. But what is there? Yeah, he does talk about that, and I thought, yeah, that is the entire book of my book, Untrue Story, whatever, is about, I don't know, 65, 70,000 words, right? And it was inspired by one verse in Matthew, which is, it was about, unless you, what was it? About only children enter the kingdom of heaven. It was something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I took 70,000 words to explain that.
Yeah.
And but that's what does that mean? The idea of only children can enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, you have to be childlike again in the terms of that your relationship with time has now changed. Yeah. And you are again a timeless being. And only a timeless being can be in heaven all the time, right? And it's amazing how many levels of past we have in front of us, whether it's even walking in the park. We almost can't do that without time. We can't be utterly present. We can't be in a space of no time. And until we are.
Indeed.
But yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Shannon has said, because that's fantastic what he said, because the point was the bullying that happened to him, he repeated to his child, but it was the bullying itself that was doing it. It was an expression of whatever had happened was this energetic thing that had then transmitted again into the world to create this pattern. And one thing, Lynn said, she said to me the other day, what you just said then was so hopeful. It's wonderful. Obviously, I don't say very much that's hopeful, but it was that, which was, I said, I feel that this past energy is benign. I think it's actually trying to resolve itself. I think it's trying to end.
Yes.
And it can only do that by appearing in the world again, for us to finally get it. I got it, in part, as I mentioned earlier, when my child was born. Shannon got it 4 years into him being a parent, when he started to say, what the heck am I doing, Yeah. And so it does repeat out in the world again. And I think it does it because it does seek its own ending.
Well, hopefully so. Shannon, for the record, is a lady.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Yes, and we are in the times, aren't we? And these are a few of the threads that I'd love to bring in, because they kind of contextualize what you've been talking about into some of the words of our time. Because obviously, 2,000 years ago, it was possibly the Lord Jesus Christ and teacher was able to say things in a different way, and we've had kind of, based on what you were saying, notwithstanding what you've been saying, we've had more time, haven't we, since then, and more layers possibly of this that we've lived into. So maybe more to go back through, and maybe that's why it takes.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, how far do you want to go? I mean, I feel it's enough to deal with this life, but in truth, when you are dealing with this, you actually find it's multi-generational.
Yeah.
It goes back years before you're born. You are bringing this energy into the world as well as the energy you're creating in this lifetime. And that, I see that a lot. I see that there's lots of interesting studies into this, actually.
Well, there are so many people talking about this in a way, aren't there? Because what I was hoping to bring in at that point, because you sort of triggered that thought in me, was the idea of people being cycle breakers. And dealing with ancestral patterns. This is very much on the table at the moment, isn't it?
Totally, ancestral patterns. Yeah, absolutely. That's that, and I think it's real. And you see it where whatever it might be, either it's deprivation, it could be alcohol, it could be gambling, you name it.
Yeah,
passes into this life. And then I said to one woman once, I said, do you know why people celebrate a birth? And she says, well, it's a new baby. I said, yeah, but why do they really celebrate? She says, I don't know. I said, it's another opportunity for the shit to end.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I can really relate to that. Yeah. New hope. New hope.
It is. Maybe this kid is going to break the cycle, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And we hope and pray for that, don't we?
Yeah,
And
we do.
and we also understand when it doesn't happen, because we know all of that. And that hope can be expressed in this new innocent being, which I think as well, we have this sense that you spoke of, that it is timeless, and it's yet to gather. If it's like a candy floss stick, it's yet to gather the web of sugar around it, hasn't it?
That's good.
Yes.
Have you copyrighted that, or can I steal it?
You can have that. You're welcome to that, Brian.
Thanks, mate.
Unless I stole it, of course, and it gets you into a lot of trouble. Then I knew nothing about that.
Yeah, nothing to do with me.
Breaking patterns, fantastic, of the time. Gabor Mate. I know you prefer not to use the word trauma, and I think when I don't know, these have been the last 3 or 4 years. People have been talking about trauma more openly and realizing that it's not
that. I mean, for many, well, because I hear that, you know, for the many hands that go up when I go through these 17, you know, ACEs, there are lots of hands that don't go up, and a lot of people say, I had a really happy childhood. You know, I didn't have any problems, you know. But you do, because you've got past energy. Everyone does. You have to. It's part of the contract of being a human being. We've got to go through this, you know. And so and as I say, I think people do. Yeah, I mean, I went through trauma. Maybe you did, and I you know, I don't mind saying that, and I don't mind saying I was abused. I don't mind saying I had chronic depression. But some people are either sensitive to that or never had it. You know, and they had really great childhoods, and everything went swimmingly well, and good for them. But, you know, nonetheless, that's why I use this slightly more moderate term of everyone has had time-heavy experiences where time is being created in you somehow, and that does resonate with everybody. You know, that's true for everyone.
I think that's absolutely right. And do you think there was, and it's hard to step out of our vocabulary, isn't it? So there will be contradictions in the use of the word time, because that's our linguistic convention, if you like.
Yeah.
But it seems to me, based on what you've said, then, that we live in quite brutal and dark times, in a way, in a sense, because we don't recognize how sensitive, fragile, and beautiful and magnificent babies are, and then put them through that process. Is that something to do with what we call normality?
I'm not sure particularly that we're in particularly dark times. I think that's all times. You know, I mean,
and that is just the mechanism of this existence, then.
Yeah, I really do.
Fair enough.
I mean, at what point have children been treated well? You know,
well,
I mean,
okay.
I mean, even to me, I mean, I'm a sort of keen advocate for education without schools. I just think schools are ridiculous forms of, you know, sort of soft prisons, if you will. But,
Mrs. M will like that. Okay. Yes.
But, you know, I mean, but it's either that or children going to work in factories at the age of 5. You know, I mean, throughout history, we've had that, and I think it is that brutality of humanity, which is almost, you feel in the end, I guess it must be like a necessary thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we have to get beyond that, you know, and we, you know, as I say in the book, another sort of optimistic expression, I said, you know, the path to heaven passes right through hell.
Yep.
And we have to do that. And it's a bit like, if you like, the mythic stories. I mean, I quote a lot of those. But, you know, the Garden of Eden. Well, we get expelled from the Garden of Eden because we ate from the tree of knowledge. We started to know stuff. We expelled. But the story didn't actually end there, or shouldn't have ended there, because the point is you have to get back into the Garden of Eden, but come back as knowing beings.
Yes.
And that's ultimately the purpose. And we only do that by understanding time itself and its energetic patterns. And when we understand our relationship to time and how it creates us and our world and the problems we have and all the rest of it, when we understand that, and it to the point where it ends, and you know, that's ultimately the point of this is, and by even talking about this, I hope it helps people look in a different way at their issues, whatever they might be.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, there are exercises, you know, we do as well, of course, to help people. But anyway, when you get through all that, then you re-enter the garden, if you will, as a knowing being, and
the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, no, and all that you've heard in your past in terms of spiritual teaching can begin to make a different kind of sense to you, can't it?
Yeah,
Because
it
there
does.
must be something in it for it to have been so perennial and at hand for
Well,
humanity.
it is. I mean, what do they all say? I mean, since, I don't know, 2,500, 3,000 years ago, we got all the gurus saying, well, we are eternal souls, that we live forever, all this sort of stuff. And we say, yeah, right. It really doesn't feel like that to me, mate.
Yes.
And so I suppose one thing about time, like saying, well, why is there this difference between what the saints tell us and how we're living? And there's an enormous chasm. So either the saints were all mad,
yeah,
or we're insane.
Yeah.
One has to be true, and
Yes.
and it is that we're insane, of course, because we are eternal beings. But that there is something about us that lives forever, if I may use an expression from time. But yeah, and we have to. When I say, for example, well, God isn't a thing; God is an action. And the purpose is, beyond being timeless beings, is that we then bring God into the world.
Yeah.
And that really is the ultimate quest of every human being. But you can only do that once that human being has understood his and her relationship to time. And I really do think that time is really, as I know you probably have guessed, I really think it's so key. And it's not really something that's been talked about very much.
No, we're so conditioned, brainwashed, aren't we, into accepting it. I suppose it's a bit like the other sort of cliche of it's the water that we swim in as fish, isn't it? It's so close to us that we can't deconstruct that. So we look in.
Well, I think we think of. I mean, we've been brought up to think, well, there's this thing called time that sort of must exist somehow. We sort of play around with the Terminator and stuff like this. So it must be a dimension, and the scientists say it must be a dimension because we do time travel, and we're aware of time because we have to wait too long for the Uber to turn up, and oh, got another grey hair in my head today, or in my case, no hair, and so we don't really think about time particularly, and we sort of take it for granted that that's what must be happening. And that's about as far as we take it. And I find the same, to be honest with you, with a lot of these saints, gurus, or whomsoever, don't really talk about that very much, as if they don't see that's the issue, that time itself is creating the you that has the problem. And I found that, and I suppose that's why it was profound, Carl. And I wish I could claim merit for it, but as I say, it came crashing into my skull while I was busy doing nothing. And so I can't really say I thought of this because I didn't. But it just seems, and then of course, you think, what the hell was this? But the more you look at it, the more you study, the more you talk to people, the more you work with people in workshops, whatever, or looking at modern psychiatry. You almost want to shout at the book, don't you get it? It's about time. It's not, you just get this, and they just don't. And it's interesting with the recent study about, depression is not the result of a serotonin imbalance after all, which, by the way, was totally manufactured by the drugs industry. But that aside, the researchers said that, no, it obviously isn't anything to do with serotonin. But she said, I think it must have something to do with, unfortunate events, if you like, in people's lives. Yeah, right. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, no shit. Oh, you mean, a bloke whose wife just died of cancer and lost his job, he might be a bit depressed. Yeah, yes. But it's more profound than that. I mean, this is the point. It's much more profound than that.
Okay, and so it's time to talk about time, possibly, and context rather than the content. Because something else that occurred to me while you were talking was how we're being. It's almost like the thoughts that become what might be, based in trauma, become toxic. They're almost like parasitic, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And your process is almost like a parasite cleanse of spiritual realization to see how these, you know how.
Oh, you're so such form time. First Candy Crush analogy. Now this is brilliant.
You can have this one as well. But you know how in Mrs. M, she's talking about parasite cleanses from time to time. I think we're on one at the moment, and it might be in the way that sugar lives in us and the things that feed on sugar. You think you want a chocolate bar, but it's the thing that is using you as a host that wants the sugar.
Well,
And you think
that biologically, that is true.
yes, and this is a spiritual or mental or
Spiritual form
psychological
of the
version of
same
that, isn't it?
thing. It's the
Yes.
parasite. Yeah. So, and I think that's, yeah, there's so much to unpack there, Carl. You said so many good things. But I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, we got to understand the extraordinary power of thought and how it does create our world. And we interpret our world through these thoughts. And, you know, it is so profound and goes so deep. And yet we don't really look at, well, where did these thoughts actually come from?
Yeah.
And, you know, we think we're just being rational. Of course, we're totally irrational. Human beings are utterly irrational beings. They're completely emotional beings. But so they don't think or see where these thoughts come from. But because they create your world, they totally create your world. You live in this cocoon of these thoughts, and think that is the world. And it's quite interesting because, you know, I mentioned before we went on air about Lynn and I doing a workshop together in a few weeks' time in England, in Yorkshire. But it also, what also happens with this energy, it becomes self-selective, so that you start seeing the world according to those energy patterns.
Yeah.
And that means you dismiss or never see about 98% of actually what's going on around you.
Yeah, because you're seeking
your salvation. It could be your salvation. It could refute everything that you believe, etc., etc., etc. But you never see it.
No, because you're looking
the energy
for an
is endorsing itself.
Yes, and you're looking for an affirmation of something that wants a fix, presumably, which could be anger or any other number of things that were planted early on in life.
Yeah, it's a confirmation of your experience, and that's how the world actually is.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah. So presumably that might have caused some people or people in the future. I hesitate to say, who might see this recording and think, what? Yeah. Wow, I guess that sounds true. Wow. So that means that. Wouldn't it be great if some of those moments occur? If we could finish with, I'd like to know more about the workshop, because it's people will be delighted to hear that you and Lynn are working together, and maybe one or two daily practical ways of people catching themselves in the way that you've described as this being spiritual work, as being breakthrough work, as realization work. That's how I think the great work, if you like, occurs for humanity. It's like, what sort of, first of all, then, what will the workshop be? How can people find out more about it?
Well, I'm afraid it's all fully booked.
Is it? You tease us.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So I was telling you because I was talking about Lynn and our work and this, but it is fully booked, unfortunately. But I mean, it's we're doing it together in Yorkshire in a couple of weeks' time, and yeah, it's really interesting because I think that both our work has been accelerating, and I think that, you know, my stuff has really helped Lynn, and Lynn is always finding new stuff which I find amazing, and you know, I use that too. So it's, you know, it's terrific partnership stuff, and we're looking forward to that very much indeed. But in terms of exercises, there are loads of exercises. From the simplest ones are, you know, it's learning to see without naming, and seeing how long you can do that. And that becomes an incredibly important muscle as the work develops. Although it's a ground foundation exercise, it's a really important one, because, you know, what you've got to get past is when, let's say, well, what happens is, you know, you have anger because of this past energy, what have you. Well, what happens? Well, that you either continue being angry to endorse the original anger, or you try to do something in opposition to that. So therefore, you know, if you're unhappy or angry, you seek help, but that comes from the anger, and it comes from the unhappiness. You know, happiness does not seek happiness, so it can only come from unhappiness. So one of the early exercises to learn to start seeing without naming helps you to break that reaction, because you don't want to fix it. If you're angry, you don't want to fix it, because if you're trying to fix it, it's just more anger, but the reverse. But it's the same thing, comes from the same place.
Yeah, well said.
So what you have to say is to see that process. And when you really see, and you can see it without naming, you can see it without condemning, that's very powerful. Then it does come to an end. So one early exercise is just that. There's we do some meditations where you can feel the emotion still in the body and how that feels, and working with those feelings. There's stuff about, I think really, forgiveness is obviously, of course, such a powerful spiritual thing, but
yes,
it has special meaning because, I said to Lynn, because we have a certain narrative, forgiveness is when the story ends.
Wow,
Story
beautiful.
ends. But I think it's also, forgiveness is all about forgiving yourself for carrying the load so long,
It's
So
deep. Yeah, it's not just letting people off, is it? It's not
nothing
that.
to do with that. Well, it's nothing to do with that, because it's not within your jurisdiction to let anybody off anything.
Absolutely.
We don't have that power, but we do have the power within us to not carry that any longer. And we do that by realizing that, one of the things that really helped resolve things for me and my father, wretched though he was the realization, well, he wasn't great, was the realization that he really was doing the very best he could.
Yes, yes.
And that's really important, and you suddenly see all these terrible giants who loom over you that made your life, and you realize they were just human beings, just doing what they could, doing the best they could, even if it was just awful and fell so far short. They themselves were just broken human beings,
I'm with
and I
you
think
on
when you
that.
start to see that, it really does help heal. So there's a number of little exercises like that,
That's fantastic, and they have their reasons, don't they? I was thinking this only today. If we can't understand or disapprove of other people's behaviour, they certainly have their reasons, and their whatever got them there will make sense to them, or will be some matter of survival for them. So that's beautiful, Bryan. If I could scale that up finally, then, to where we are in the world at the moment, is in the way that James Lovelock proposed the Gaia hypothesis.
Yes.
Is there a which has some sort of attractiveness to it, doesn't it? To think of
that we are these wretched viruses that have to be.
Oh, is that where he took it? Okay, well, that's not quite what.
Oh, okay. No, he believed global warming was happening to get rid of the virus,
yes,
which was us.
Oh, okay, all right. So I quite like the early bit of that hypothesis.
Okay,
not where it ended up.
He got quite dark.
He went dark, didn't he? And he lived to a ripe old age being dark. So it obviously worked for him, didn't it?
Yeah.
And God rest his soul, because I know he passed away a little while ago.
Yeah.
But is there a collective and global sense of this phenomenon that in time like therapy is going to be largely for individuals, because that's where we've got to right now. But do you get a collective sense of a global collective healing, and how this dimension, or this if there is a kind of Gaia type energy in which we're all connected and operating within, is that working on itself in the same way?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, going back to our Krishnamurti again, you and I are the only two who remember him. He said, when you change the world. And I think that's because your consciousness shifts, and it does shift other things. But it is always about the individual. You can't start from saying, I want to save the world.
Sure.
Yeah, I must save myself, and then I'll try and save you.
Yes.
And that's probably about as far as we can go, and actually have the belief that actually is enough.
Yes. Well, that's a wonderful note to end on, the power of what we can do within our own realm, if you like, because that's where that great phrase. Would you mind sharing that with us? That pivotal phrase for you. I mean, that operates on a very individual level.
What the 11th commandment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. And you can spend a lifetime thinking about that, which I have, and it has such deep meanings. It goes deeper and deeper.
Well, it does, doesn't it? Because it works on the most prosaic level of getting your life in order, and there is a flow, isn't there?
But it's the attending, Carl. It's being fully present in the moment, and when you are, you do have 360-degree vision of a situation.
Yes.
And you see all the weaknesses of the other people, whatever they're doing, and there is immediate forgiveness in that moment, and nothing stays. You know, past doesn't happen, and that's yeah.
Are you experiencing this more and more? Have you broken through to having that as your overwhelming sense of being in this world now?
I mean, look, I mean, you know, Timelight is not an act of amnesia, and you know, I mean, I certainly still remember, but the difference, I think, the difference is for me. So I do obviously remember my father and all the rest of it, but it doesn't have any power over me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really the point, where the past has no power over you, and that's where you are winning, you know. And that's, you know, I mean, I know I'm so blessed. I'm so thankful for everything. I really do. I know it's a cliche, but I really do appreciate everything about my day. And you know, and it's just an unfolding miracle, which of course life actually is, if you can see that. And so that's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, and that's the light part, isn't it? We've talked a lot about time, and that's the lightness, I guess you're speaking.
That's
of.
The lightness. That's entering no time.
Oh, beautiful, Bryan. Thank you so much for talking with me this evening. If people want to find out more, time-light.co.uk. And although your upcoming workshop with Lynn is sold out, presumably people can register at timelight.co.uk.
Yeah. Just leave an email, and I promise not to spam them, but yeah, we'll just stay in touch with stuff. And you know, I'm planning some courses and putting stuff together now, and because I should, so I am.
Yes, Bryan, so good to catch up with you, and thanks again. Thank you so much for talking to me tonight. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mrs. M, for letting us use your channel. Feel Good Conversations. All right, ciao, ciao, bye for now. Thank you, everybody, with your observations and questions tonight also.